Thank you and welcome. I have the honor of interviewing Gretchen, and I really want to thank you all for giving up this beautiful morning where I
Totally.
would otherwise be at the dog beach. But this book is fascinating and really, really important for our society. So I want to jump into questions, and we're going to save time for all of you to ask Gretchen questions. So I want to read a quote from actually, it's page 305 if anybody's counting. What began as a small renegade world of Drexel Burnham Lambert funded corporate raiders has morphed into an industry managing 12 million workers and generating 6.5% of gross domestic output. So, just to set the stage of how huge private equity has become. So, I want to give Gretchen a chance, in her own words, to talk about the main points of her book, what she wants you to have as takeaways.
Well, thank you, Freada. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming on such a beautiful day. I really thought maybe we'd have two or three people. It's great to see a crowd. Thank you for giving up your day to talk about a what I believe is a predatory economic industry that is really widening the gap between rich and poor in this country. And I love Frida because she is interested in closing the gap. So she could not be more different from the people I am writing about. And closing this gap is, I think, more crucial than ever. The people I'm talking about are the big, powerful private equity firms like Blackstone, Apollo, Carlyle, KKR, that use heavy levels of debt to buy companies, make them more efficient, quote unquote, and then sell them within a short term time frame, 5 to 7 years, at a profit, they hope. Private equity is invested in by a lot of public pension funds who provide oxygen to these people that run these firms and to their business practices, which I believe are problematic for the economy. So we have a very small group of extremely wealthy people who have capitalized on this system over the years, and we have a very much wider, bigger array of people who have been harmed. These include workers at companies who are taken over and then fired. These include pensioners whose pensions are sometimes decimated when the acquirers come in. These include customers in many cases. One very trusted academic study showed that nursing homes owned by private equity, residents of those nursing homes, died at a rate of 10% more than in non private equity owned nursing homes. Again, this is part of the efficiency that they're doing, which means not hiring enough staff. So you have the workers, you have the pensioners, you have the customers, and you have taxpayers. When a company goes bankrupt that is owned or that private equity acquired, the tax base of the town can be decimated. So the taxpayers end up paying the freight. And when pensions, which were previously backed by the government, are taken over by these companies and they go bankrupt, again, it's the taxpayers on the hook. So we have a wide array of people who are harmed by a system that really is a billionaire creating machine.
I want to drill down a little bit on that and talk specifically about private equity's involvement in healthcare. You mentioned nursing homes, but let's talk about emergency rooms, let's talk about practices, dermatology practices, veterinarian practices. Talk about private equity's impact in healthcare, please.
Private equity has really dived deep into healthcare. This is not a surprise. It's 17% of gross domestic product in this country. That means it is an enormous pool of capital that they can dive into. It is also a system that requires big government payouts on Medicare, Medicaid. So, this is a huge source of potential income for these companies. They have taken over, they run or operate 40% of the nation's emergency departments. They don't advertise this. You will not see over the hospital emergency department sign owned by Blackstone or owned by Apollo, but they are there. They're behind the scenes. And they're telling the emergency department doctors how to do healthcare. And they are starting to push back on this, Freada. There's actually a group of doctors in Michigan that are organizing, trying to form a union so that they can continue to do the right thing for their patients in spite of these efforts. We also have private equity in nursing homes, veterinarians they've taken over, dermatologists, anesthesiologists are a huge area for private equity. Again, sometimes it's hard to really capture how much they're involved, but what I tell people is when you go to your veterinarian, when you go to your dermatologist, ask them, are you owned by private equity? Because what the studies show is that you will be subject to more tests to generate more revenues, and the doctor will spend less time with you, and other members of the staff will spend more time with you, the less expensive members of the staff. So these are outcomes that really do affect people. They affect care.
I was going to say also, I think in an article you sent me, just New York Times, was it yesterday, day before yesterday, really interesting article on this whole subject, talked about doctors who have spoken out being fired. And so how much do they have any legal rights about retaliation or speaking up other than organizing?
This is a problem for doctors. And traditionally, when they work in a hospital, the hospital has what's like a due process. If there's a problem with the doctor, they have to go before a sort of unbiased tribunal, figure out what went wrong. There is a due process. When the emergency departments are run by private equity, they can fire them at will. And they can say, okay, well, you're off the schedule, you're going to go over to this other place that we own. So there is a huge conflict between treating patients the way they should be treated and the bottom line in this case.
You describe, for the big four private equity firms, you describe their philosophy as I, me, mine. And for those of us who are old enough, we recognize that as Beatles lyrics from the last recorded song of the Beatles, right? But for those who are not Beatles fans, what do you mean by I, me, mine as a philosophical summary for private equity?
Well, it gets to the heart of the problem, in my view, which is, we all want a capitalist system that benefits the most people, benefits the workers, benefits investors, benefits customers, benefits suppliers. We want all the stakeholders to benefit from the system. And what this system is doing is really putting the financiers at the very head of the line, and everyone else is a very distant second. And so that's what I mean by I, me, mine. So instead of thinking in an enlightened way about that we could maybe enhance the lives, improve the lives, create wealth for workers. Instead of thinking in those terms, they're really thinking in terms of their bottom line. And they often hide behind the idea that we are investing for pensions. We're investing for public pensions like CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York Common Retirement Fund. And so we're doing good because we are benefiting those pension beneficiaries. But they are taking enormous fees. Enormous fees. There was a Harvard study that found, I think, 10% of the money invested went to fees over a period of time in private equity investments. They're very obscure and opaque. You don't know what they're investing in. You don't know how much money they're taking out. They're subject to really problematic fees that the SEC has attacked these firms for, which diminished the value of the investments. And so it's really a question, and the returns, Freada, finally, the returns are not what they used to be. So the justification for pension funds to invest in these entities, I think, is becoming more and more questionable.
So, not everyone has loved your book as much as I did, especially those from private equity. And this issue of the public pension funds investing. So I mentioned the dog beach earlier. I was on the dog beach yesterday morning, and I had this interesting conversation with a gentleman who's been a management consultant to financial services firms for decades. And I told him how lucky I was that I get to interview Gretchen, and he said, everything she says is wrong. I haven't read the book. I thought, there you have it. You know, there's that really rigorous investigation that we all want to see. And then I listened to a podcast with Scott Galloway, who said, I don't agree with most things you say, but you're fearless. And he said, I'm a great admirer of Gretchen's. You're fearless, but I don't agree with you. How have you managed to get in under so many elites' skin? What buttons are you pushing that you're getting this pushback?
I think the main button I'm pushing is called real journalism. Okay, so these people are extremely powerful, very wealthy, and they're lionized in the press. My colleagues in the media, you know, cover their every move. They watch what they do, where they buy homes, you know, where they vacation. They're really held up as kind of people to emulate.
They're on Nantucket, not here.
They're on Nantucket, right? Perfect. So anyway, so they're not used to having people question what they're doing, and they've had a really nice 30-year plus role where people haven't really questioned it, where they've been, you know, accepted as brilliant financiers who are creating efficiencies in the companies that they take over, and are creating jobs. So this is really the counter argument to that. One quick anecdote. When I was reporting the book and reaching out to the firms, I wanted their participation, of course, because that always makes the story better. And I reached out to Blackstone because there are a couple of anecdotes involving Blackstone and Steve Schwarzman, the co-founder. And I said, you know, my thesis here is that you're widening the gap between rich and poor in this country, that you're at the economic controls, that it's bad for the country, and that you're, you know, be creating billionaires in your own halls. And so, you know, they said, no, that's absolutely wrong. That's an 80s caricature of the, you know, Raiders from R.J.R. Nabisco days. And you're wrong. We've actually created net new jobs. We've created 200,000 net new jobs at the companies we've acquired in the last 15 years. Well, this goes against a lot of academic research that shows that they fire people. One that shows 13% decline in employment at these companies after taken over by private equity. So I said, wow, that's fantastic. 200,000 net new jobs, that's great. I would love to see the data behind that. And I had provided the data to them that I was using for my argument. And I thought, well, this is going to be good. I'm going to actually be able to see those jobs, where they were created, which companies. So I wait, and I wait. A couple of days later, I get an email. We respectfully decline. So I'm sorry, if you can't provide the data, I'm just not going to believe it's there.
Yep, I don't blame you. So your origin story, you are a superb journalist, but you also started as somebody working in financial services. Tell that origin story.
Okay, it was ancient history. So
Well,
it
I'm
was,
older than you are.
I
not
don't
to me.
think so. Anyway, it was 1980. Well, first of all, my first job in New York was as a assistant. I used to call myself slave, but that's not right anymore. But assistant at Vogue magazine, making $8,000 a year. And so I was, you know, struggling to climb the ladder, and I did finally start writing about personal finance in Vogue, which no one ever read those stories. And I decided, you know, I can't make a living. I don't have a rich father. I don't have a rich husband. I didn't have any husband. I'm going to have to make it on my own. I'll see if I can go to Wall Street. Wall Street had just recently lost a big case in which they had been attacked by the EEOC of not hiring enough women. So I was a beneficiary of that. They hired me Dean Witter Reynolds hired me as a stockbroker. I had no sales experience, but I aced the phone test. I gave great phone, and they hired me. And so I spent 3 years there. I sat down in my chair to start selling stocks in January of 1982 when the Dow Jones Industrial Average was around 780. So, perfect trajectory for success, but it wasn't for me. So, I did 3 years there. I learned where the bodies are buried. I learned the way the world really works. And it was a great experience, and went back to journalism.
So tell us about what propelled you to describe yourself as an accountability journalist, someone who wanted to talk about harms and help expose things and help right wrongs. What propelled you in that direction?
Well, when I was a stockbroker, lived through a mini bear market in 1983. It was the sort of first almost tech bubble. Some computer stocks you don't remember. Mitch, you remember them. But anyway, I lived through that, and it was harrowing for customers who lost money. And I felt terrible, even though it wasn't really my fault. They had wanted to buy. Everyone was kind of engaged in this idea that this was the new thing they needed to be. I felt really a lot of guilt. And if you have a capacity for guilt, that job is not good for you. But anyway, so I learned what happens to people and how traumatic it can be to lose money in these things. And that was really propelled me to want to understand the truth about investments and what's, beneath the surface that you don't see, and how people can really protect themselves.
So, is there any hope?
For what?
Good.
The world at large?
Yes, we can do that a little later. Well, one thing, your book talks about regulatory reform, but in one of the recent podcasts, you said, well, you're not so sure about that because when a door closes, they find an open window. And so it's kind of this whack-a-mole game, kind of arms race, if you will. So how can we bring, you talked about opacity in the industry, how can we bring more transparency? How can we create a level playing field? And related to that, I'm very interested in what's the intersection, if private equity was more diverse, if it was more representative of the pensioners demographically, if it had more U.S. racial minorities, if it had more women, would it make a difference? How would it change the culture?
I have not worked in a private equity firm, so I don't know what the culture is like. I have a good idea, but I'm just speculating. So, but I cannot believe it would not help to have more women, more people of color, more people who came from reduced backgrounds, not the elite Ivy League graduates, more people who have experienced poverty or near poverty, and who really understand what financial practices can do to them and their lives. I cannot imagine that would not be helpful to these firms. Their mindset, they're right now in the mindset of, we have to make a return. We don't care how it happens. Boom, we're doing it. As far as an outcome that would be, talk about transparency, the SEC is crafting new rules for transparency for private funds like private equity. And so there will be an opportunity for people to know more about what they're investing in. I think that we need pension funds to start questioning why they are investing in these kinds of funds, and start really asking the tough questions about what I call an unsustainable business model. If you're hurting so many people and benefiting just a few, is that the way we really want to operate? But again, there is an awful lot of money at stake here, and there's an awful lot of money that is, flowing to Washington to make sure that nothing changes, particularly the tax loophole that allows these executives to pay, I think it's 23% as the highest income tax rate versus 35%.
The carried interest.
The carried interest. So, it's a big battle. What I really wanted to do was to explain, shine a light, to let people know what's happening, so that you can begin to understand it. It's been very stealth, Freada, because these are private companies and they're under the radar, and you don't know. I mean, how many people? I didn't know that 40% of the emergency departments in this country are operated by these people until I did the arithmetic and went around and found. So it's been a stealth takeover.
Yeah.
and it's time to really understand it.
Uh, in that spirit, there is legislation. It was authored last fall. It didn't come up for a vote. It's coming up again, and it's called the Endowment Transparency Act. And it was co-sponsored by Representative Cleaver out of Missouri and Senator Cory Booker out of New Jersey, and it's focused on university endowments and making them more transparent about. You send in that alumni check. Do you know what it's invested in? And so we're actually, this is, I think Gretchen and I are both capitalists interested in a level playing field and gap closing. And so I think this is a really interesting step in the right direction to say, look, if you're going to be investing on behalf of a university, we need to know where that money is invested, and we need to know who those asset managers are that are investing that money. I won't throw anybody under the bus here, but there's a ed tech fund that's very focused on impact, which is Reach Capital, and we are LPs in Reach Capital and have been in every one of their funds. And they went to one of the largest university endowment managers and with a very good track record. And one of the largest university endowment managers said to them, "We don't invest in ed tech."
What?
Exactly. They didn't think the returns were going to be high enough. So I think we need to really know a little bit more about what's going on. And I would love to see a huge campaign, online billboards, whatever it takes, that says, before you write that $10 or $10,000 or $10 million alumni check, do you know who's investing it and where it's being invested? And we'll start with universities, and we can go to foundations next, because there's trillions of dollars there that could make a real difference in gap closing. So I want to do a time check about how we're doing, and doing great. Okay. Okay. So I
One
want
thing,
to.
Frida, just in addition to that,
Yeah.
the pensions. So, talking about gap closing, so a recent, you know, tragedy occurred when it was found by the Department of Labor that a company that cleans slaughterhouses in the Midwest was hiring 13-year-olds. They were hiring children to clean the slaughterhouses at night. And this is a company called PSSI, and it is owned by Blackstone. So this particular company is in a fund that is owned both by CalSTRS and CalPERS. And so, of all the people in the world who would seem to me to care about a company that hires children to clean slaughterhouses, it would be the managers of a pension, public
Well,
pension.
and on behalf of retired teachers.
On behalf of retired public employees. So I called up CalPERS and CalSTRS and I said, I know that you're in this fund. The fund owns PSSI. PSSI hires children to clean, 100 children, not just a few, 100, to clean slaughterhouses. Are you at all concerned about this? And are you going to continue investing with Blackstone, given that they are the ones who own this company and have 3 members of their firm on the board of this company? Okay. No comment. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, you're kind of in the tank with these people. I mean, how about saying we are going to, scrutinize more closely or, but there was nothing, no response. It was not a sense of urgency. And I was really kind of surprised and obviously discouraged.
Uh-huh. So that's another area where transparency would make a huge difference. If we understood their investment criteria, if we understood their reporting, what kinds of information, what kinds of investigation they do into their portfolio companies. Any other specific suggestions for what everybody in the audience can do, how you go home and look at where your pension is invested, what kind of supportive activism can people do to help with the transparency, to help with the accountability?
Well, under the Trump administration, there was a door opened for private equity investments to be considered by high net worth individuals. Traditionally, these have been off limits for individual investors of all stripes. And so it was, the belief was, at least the argument was, oh, we need to allow individual investors to take part in these great investment vehicles that generate such great returns. They can't be left behind, was the quote. And so, I would say, do not invest in those things. I mean, just be careful about that. You might get, Blackstone has an enormous real estate investment trust, for instance, that's invested in a lot of different real estate and is having difficulties because there are more people who want to take their money out than they are allowing. So they put up these gates and it's not liquid. People can't get out. They probably didn't read the fine print to know that they couldn't get out in this case. So I would say, be careful about being pitched on some of because they are going down from institutions only down into the individual high net worth and individual investor class. They're trying to expand their, pool of possible investor money. It's very hard to find out who owns the company that you do business with. I think that's by design, but in any case, it's very difficult. So you can't, I say, go to the emergency department and say, hey, by the way, are you private equity owned while you're, in an emergency situation? Probably not going to happen. But certainly you can ask your doctor, ask your veterinarian. And I just think awareness of what is happening is a good thing. And I think you'll start to see, as I have recently, more headlines about people questioning private equity, questioning the returns, questioning the business model. And I think it's just a moment where we can say, okay, we want to have more people benefit from capitalism, not fewer. And if that's the direction we want to go in, this is not it.
There's another thing you talk at length about, which is how difficult it is to find out the real underlying value of what's in the portfolios and sort of how often these funds update the real value of what's in their portfolio, what's called mark to market. Can you talk a little bit about that? And is that another lever that investors can pull to make this situation a little more fair?
So unlike a stock investment fund, unlike a S&P 500 fund, mutual fund that you own, at the end of every day, you know where you stand, you know whether you're up and you're down. Private equity does not value every day because these are private companies, and so they don't have to do that. And so you end up having this lag period behind where they have to actually value it and what has gone on. And we've seen this in particular this year because of rising interest rates. A lot of these firms who are using a lot of debt are finding that companies are under stress because of the heavy debt that they use and are going bankrupt at a faster rate than I think since 2013. There are more private equity bankruptcies than there have been since 2013 so far this year. So you do have these issues with valuation where investors can believe, like CalPERS might believe that they're up 10%, but in actuality, they may not be up 10%. They may be up only 5% because a lot of these valuations are estimates and lag time. And so that is it's almost an alignment with the chief investment officer of CalPERS to pretend what the valuation is. So it's an interesting question, and I think valuation, we really need to have better scrutiny and more clarity on what the valuations are.
So how would we change how we hire and how we reward chief investment officers?
I think it's just about hiring people who have these values and have these goals. And it's not just about the bottom line. It's not just about, the shareholder capitalism where the only concern is the return to the shareholder and everybody else in the equation is not important. I think we really need to have a mindset change about that. Yes, I understand they're trying to produce wealth for their pensioners and to produce a prosperous retirement. But at what cost? At what expense? And so it's these efficiencies that they do. What are the cost of those efficiencies? Asking those questions. I mean, I don't think it should be that difficult, but it has been difficult to get people to think in those terms.
Well, I know chief investment officers are only judged by returns. So I think if we changed that formula, that would go a long way. And I know in our own very little, small, early seed stage investing, part of our investment diligence is we ask if this business succeeds, who benefits and does anyone suffer? And it's a pretty straightforward question. And I think we can all ask that of our asset managers, our investment advisors. Pretty straightforward. And it helps us decide who to back and who not to back. Any other suggestions before we open it up for questions?
I'm at the ready. Let's go.
Okay. There's a microphone over here. Your turn to tell us we all got it wrong.
I assume you're including hedge funds on the
I
private
am not
equity,
including hedge funds.
but it's the same kind of issues.
It
right?
is not the same. They often invest in publicly traded stocks. They
But-
often
but-
invest
but,
in.
but there's no transparency. and
There's
the-
less
the
transparency, yes.
Reporting is fudge.
That element, yes.
Fudge. And could you discuss the political impact of both hedge funds and private equity leadership, like Schwartzman, on politics and the court? You didn't mention any of that.
Okay. Well, the impact of these very, very wealthy private equity firms and their executives on politics is immense, not surprisingly. Schwarzman was actually a Donald Trump advisor and was at his right hand for many of the decisions that he made about the economy. And so they are very powerful. When the Congress was entertaining an idea of how to close the tax loophole that has made so many billionaires out of this industry, the private equity industry threw money at Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, and she was able to single-handedly stop that legislation. So money in politics is an enormous problem in this, and these pools of capital that these people have to spend are ginormous, because over all of this time they've been building up these massive amounts of money. As far as the courts, that is not an area I cover, but I am sure that they are equally interested in manipulating outcomes in the courts. I would hope that they would have less ability to buy judges, federal judges, but that would be certainly an area that I would love to look into.
Hi. How can we regulate this on a federal level? Because we can individually do things, but it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. It seems to me we need to have overhead regulation.
So the question was, how can we regulate this on a federal level? Because we can do little bits around the edges, but we need something overview. And yes, that's absolutely right. I think the SEC is trying to do that with some of these transparency rules that they're creating. They're getting a lot of pushback. I also believe that the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission could be much more active in stopping these acquisitions. They traditionally only do antitrust efforts like that for large acquisitions. They have to reach a certain threshold. And many times when you're taking over doctors' practices, for instance, they're very small. But once you have enough of them, you do have a market control issue. So I think the FTC could be much more aggressive in stopping or scrutinizing these acquisitions and how they roll up industries. And also the Department of Justice could be much more aggressive. And we're starting to see that. But again, there's going to be immense pushback from this very wealthy group of people. I would say write to your congressional representative, but I don't know that that's going to do much. But I just think, talking about it, expressing it, getting, people aware and educated is a start.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hi.
Very serendipitous talk for me today, at least. I'm actually considering a job offer with a company that is owned by a private equity company. They're in the middle of a transformation right now. I've loved every person I've talked to at this company. They're all wonderful people. But you are obviously opening my eyes to another element which I have not considered, which is if you go to work for a company that is owned by a private equity company, what is the end game? And I'm sure they're trying to sell this company for profit to somebody else. So what should I be considering as a potential employee of this company that is owned by a private equity company?
Okay, couple questions.
Great
How long
question.
have they owned the company?
Since 2017.
2017, okay. So they've done all the firing probably that they were going to do.
Yeah, and now they're in hiring mode to bring in new people to transform the company.
Okay, so it's 2017. Usually the time frame is 5 to 7 years, so we're right in that sweet spot, right? So they're going to want to sell it.
Yes, and
So
they're in that conversation right now.
Okay, so they're looking to sell it?
They've talked about partnerships, which I think means sale.
Well, it's been very difficult to sell this year because of the interest rate environment going up and the funding is drying up because of interest rates going higher. So, whenever you have a company that's acquired by another one, it's just tremendous amount of upheaval, tremendous amount of Sturm and Drang, and who are you going to be still on staff? Are you going to? It's something big to walk into and to consider walking into where you're going to be acquired by someone else. The people who you're talking to, are they going to be there? Are they going to be your bosses? Are they
Yeah.
going to be, even on the scene? So, these kinds of questions I would want to know. And if they show you the financials, definitely dig into the financials and see what what they look like.
So do you think that this is a red flag where you should sort of stay out of it, or do you think that this is potentially an opportunity, or is it too soon to tell?
I think that the people that I've talked to who have worked for private equity-owned companies just have a very similar report back, which is they make you do 3 people's jobs, and you see a lot of people get fired. It's just a kind of a distressing situation. But I don't want to give you job advice, so I really don't want to do that. But maybe that part of the episode is over, and maybe it's a stable thing. But if it's going to be sold again, then you'll go through that, and it just sounds like more upheaval than I would want. But I really don't want to.
No. I need your honest opinion. Thank you very much.
Could I add one thing to that very quickly? Mitch and I were talking to somebody whose company was bought by private equity day before yesterday, and all of the guarantees, and she's not, I'll talk to her later, all of the guarantees in her contract were taken away. So she had retention bonuses, she had severance, all of that just became null when her company was taken over. So I would be very careful about, if you're signing a contract, do those survive any acquisition?
Excellent.
2 quick questions. Do you know what percentage of for-profit hospitals are owned by private equity?
The biggest player in for-profit hospitals that's private equity is LifePoint, which is Apollo. I don't know the percentages, but I do know that the staffing companies that are owned by private equity run so many hospitals in this country. So it's almost the same thing. They don't necessarily have to own the hospital to run the hospital in a way that is private equity-esque, meaning cut staff, don't have doctors spend time with patients, et cetera.
And when you talk about the FTC or DOJ looking more closely at the acquisitions, do they have the opportunity to do so? Because my sense has been that the whole planning of it is private and not out in the public, and then it's done.
They can definitely ask questions, yes.
But how?
The federal government, they can,
No,
yes.
but where did they get that opportunity? When?
Maybe when the deal is announced, but they can stop these deals.
Yeah,
They
I'm
can.
just not sure these deals are always announced. That's my,
Yeah, well, it does require a little bit more vigilance than we've certainly had.
thank you.
Good point, thank you.
Full disclosure, I've been an investor and beneficiary of PE, but I think you were starting to point to this. Is some version of shareholder activism part of the answer to begin to turn the tide? And and you talked about CIOs having a single bottom line accountability, and you're aware of the triple bottom line. I don't have huge enthusiasm for the ability of those two things to turn the tide quickly, but is it a potential viable direction?
Well, I think the just getting people to think about it, that it should be more than just one single return, is very valuable. As far as shareholder activism, these are not public companies, so you can't get people on boards, and you can't get institutions to rattle the cage like maybe labor unions or whatever to rattle the cage on the board of the company. But I think that the concept of some of the shareholder activism that we've seen, which is about sustainability, and that this is not a sustainable business model, is very crucial to getting somewhere with this. So yes, they can't, get people on the board, or they can't have unions voting for these kinds of things, but getting people talking about this being an unsustainable business model in the same vein as some of the activism that we've seen, I think could be very valuable.
Yeah, or if there was some point of pain or some cost to
Yes.
the continuance. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Is that it?
1 minute?
Oh,
okay. Talk fast.
Hey, sorry. So I'm in climate tech startups, and there's a lot of climate tech VCs. And I've actually heard also there's private equity funds that invest in climate goals and sustainability goals more broadly. I'm wondering if you think this is possible, and if so, what some good examples of funds you've seen that do this well are.
That would be for you.
Well, I think very quickly what you want to look at is what are the investment criteria. You want to talk to other founders that have been funded. That's the best source. When entrepreneurs talk to each other, would you take money from them again? Would be a really important one. Are they going to throw the CEO out? Are they going to throw impact out at the first speed bump? Or are they committed to climate justice, long-term, staying with the company, making sure it survives?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank you for coming.
fantastic panel. Thanks to both of you. And Gretchen's book is for sale. The book sales are right over there. Please support Bunch of Grapes Bookstore. And Gretchen will be going over and signing her book for the next half hour. And our next session is about the book Rough Sleepers.